Welcome to Tim Tom Talks. I'm Tim in Sydney, Australia.
And I'm Tom in Los Angeles, California. Today we're going to be talking about adaptability. And we're actually going to be writing our article this time after we're doing our talk. So we're just going to talk about some of the subject matter that's coming up in my research. And we're going to just touch on these topics. When we talk about adaptability in organizations, sometimes it can be referred to as flexibility, but it's really the process of being able to move with a market, with manufacturing trends, with however you need to move to keep up with your demand. But it's really based on market or government requirements or whatever is driving your business.
So really it's change. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and it's usually always tied to change. So in the PCS model, which is our performance climate system, one of the models that we use, measurement tools that we use actually, they talk about three topics that are important to adaptability, and those are openness to change, 2, innovation, and 3, sustainability of change. And Tim and I both had thoughts on openness to change. And so Tim, I'm going to let you go with the organizational side of openness to change.
Yeah, I mean, just to make one thing clear, PCS is a great measurement. It's a great model. It's something which we found really, really beneficial to helping our clients understand the context that their team is operating in. The PCS model is about teams and team level culture and performance. But when Tom and I were talking about adaptability a little bit earlier, and we were sort of scoping the article that we're going to write, I was saying that it's really apparent to me, having worked in different organizations of different scales and sort of maturity of business model, that there's a big influence on the team's adaptability, and that is the overall organizational culture that the team is living within. So I've worked in organizations which are highly adaptable, and it almost seems instinctive that they be adaptive. And then I've worked in and with organizations who really, really struggle and almost resist actively adaptability. And as I was saying to Tom before, the one thing that I've sort of found to be sort of the lever that you can use almost to define which of those organizations you're in is tolerance of failure. If an organization is really allergic to risk and just has zero tolerance of, that didn't go so well, that then sets off this cascade of behavior that really inhibits to the point of minimizing adaptability, at a team level, at an individual level, and really ultimately what balloons out is the organization itself just can't adapt and isn't open to change.
Yeah, another way to know if you're if your culture is open to change is it a learning organization? And a learning organization doesn't mean you have a bunch of training classes.
Yeah,
that is not what it is. It means is your culture completely open to failure, to trying new things, to learning from each other, to learning from outside sources, to listening to everybody in the process, to creating teams throughout the process, throughout your system, whatever it is, to determine how to best move forward. Whether you're working in a growth mindset, you're going to be looking at the process and measuring yourself and making sure that everywhere, each department and each person is measuring themselves to themselves, because you will grow faster and you're always looking for a process improvement. Same thing with systems thinking. System thinking is going to be how are we building on what we have today, breaking it apart and saying, how are we going to do this better? That's the same thing with design thinking. Another one is
Lean Six Sigma.
Yeah, it's based on the same concept of always looking at how you can make it just that much better.
Yeah, or you could look at Kaizen or Kanban, in around sort of Japanese originated continuous improvement methodologies. But it's essentially accepting that what you're doing today is not best practice almost by definition. There's always going to be a way to be seismic or incrementally better. But if you don't look for it and you don't accept that what you're doing, you know, isn't perfection, then essentially you're just diminishing the likelihood that you're going to be open to change and that you're going to be able to deal with whatever change, you know, sort of gets thrown at you as opposed to you instigating.
Yeah, and each one of those models, no matter what it is, goes back to what Tim said earlier, and that is adaptability really requires a high tolerance for failure.
Yeah, or at the very least, a willingness to accept that failure is an acceptable outcome.
Well, you learn as much from failure.
But if you fail, as a learning organization, what can we take from that? What could we go and try again with? Not just simply, we can't afford to fail. Oh my God, if we fail, you know, it's the end days, or, you know, we're all going to get fired. And unfortunately, I see far too many leaders behaving like that, and I'm sure you have as well, Tom.
Yeah, well, let's just face it. Science, all scientific investigation is based on either finding something that works or if it fails.
Yeah.
This paper and the research is just as successful if you know that it doesn't work as it is if you find something that works.
Yeah.
Because knowing that it doesn't work can lead you to something else.
Yeah.
So success, it's how you're envisioning success. Yeah. And how you're envisioning moving forward. So that's enough.
One thing I want to throw up there, which has just occurred to me, is this great definition of success from Edison. And I'm not going to get the quote exactly here, but, you know, somebody asked Edison, you know, what does success look like to you? And he just basically said, well, success is the one time out of 10,000 that we didn't fail. It's just really sort of saying you've got to fail a lot to learn enough to have that one great breakthrough and that one success. And again, I think most organizations, especially post-GFC, you know, they're so focused on having to succeed every time that they've almost completely flipped that now, and they've forgotten that, you know, actually it's failure that underwrites and predefines success in many ways.
Yeah, and failure is not, avoiding failure is not going to make you sustainable, because it means you're not going to innovate. And innovation requires failure. So what are you going to be? If you stand still, you're going to die, and you have to innovate to be viable in the future. So to innovate, you've got to be adaptable, and you've got to be open to failure. So the other part of that is when we get into change, like you had said in the beginning, adaptability is change. And it is, and there's whole change management systems. ProSci is one of them. It's world known. And there's whole processes about getting people ready for change, how you get people ready for change, getting them open, getting the right people involved, making sure that change comes from the top. But it doesn't matter. Well, that's going to be that's going to give you greater likelihood for success. If you don't follow those models, you're probably not going to have success with change. But even if you do have those models, you as a leader, if you don't understand the people that you have, and that sometimes change is in the person, some people, it's in their character, it's in their personality, they're not going to change, they're going to be fearful of change. They're going to be resistant to change, and there's going to be those who are open to change. You're not going to change their personalities, but you can understand who they are and realize what you're going to have to do to work with them. What's your experience in that?
No, I agree entirely. I think a lot of the time, there's not enough attention paid to the individual and the strengths of those individuals, and then that everybody has a role to play in any process, but you've really got to focus on, you know, the individual inclination and strengths, and then allocate them accordingly. So someone who's very defensive, someone who's very change averse, someone who, you know, you might characterize with a sort of a defensive behavior, you know, they can actually be invaluable in the change process if you orientate them towards something like quality, or, you know, a comparative role where they're saying, okay, so this is now the 3.1 version. how is it different to the 2.6? And is it actually going to give us a better outcome? Which is not to say that like that kind of change averse defensive mindset is a naysayer per se, but I think their outlook on the world is more based on stability and assurance. So your customers also need a degree of stability and assurance, otherwise they won't know what they're going to get. To poorly quote Tom Hanks' Forrest Gump, the outliers, right? Like the people who are maybe a little bit more disruptive, the kids at school, who are quite often sent to the principal's office because they weren't following the protocol. As an extreme example, but a lot of the time, those personality types, those are actually the ones who are preset for change. Because they won't just look at the way it's always been done and say, oh, well, that's the way I should do it. They're actually inherently looking at, why do we do it that way? And what if I try this? And is this going to be, faster, quicker, more profitable, whatever? And I think, this is over-exaggerated, in my opinion, in foundership and entrepreneurship, that it's the college dropouts who found the unicorns. But I think there is a grain of truth in that people who tend to look not for the way the world has always been, but the way the world could or should be, those are the ones that are more likely to be sort of passion-driven change agents in an organization. But you might have had to take a risk in hiring them in the first place, which is something else that I know you want to talk about, Tom, is how do you sort of hire for change readiness?
And one of the things that I wanted to say, and then we're just going to jump to the next topic of innovation, which ties in what you were talking about, is talent. So another thing you have to watch out for is too much change and change burnout. Because if you're constantly changing, it doesn't matter the personality, you got to stop. You cannot change for change's sake. It's got to have a purpose. It's got to have a reason, and every reason isn't a purpose. It's like, every change can't be huge. And every change can't be the most important change ever. So that burnout. Go ahead.
You can't try to do everything at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, and this is where, again, the PCS model relates, this whole realm of adaptability very closely to resilience. Not to say that they're the same, they're not, but they sit, they kind of cushion up right next to each other because, if you're really doubling down on your adaptability traits in order to propagate and sustain change, you've got to pay a lot of attention to the resilience, sort of capability and capacity as well, because, constant change is life, but constant massive change is detrimental and exhausting and leads to burnout. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, the ebb and the flow of the tide. I'm getting a little bit conscious of our session duration. So maybe I might just put one final question to you, Tom, and just say, so if there's a leader that's been, sort of following, this session and, potentially making sort of furious notes as they go, what would you say is sort of the one thing that they can at least sort of start with when it comes to being a more adaptive leader and leading a more adaptable team?
Well, let me answer that in two ways. If you're the leader of a company, you need to be purposeful of how you're going to create a culture that is going to influence change, and then you have to create a systematic way that you're going to roll that out, division by division, department by department, and have a ultimate goal, but do it a piece at a time and stay on it. And again, it's got to be embedded into the culture. This is what the PCS system will help you do and measure while you're checking performance and culture. You can measure those at the same time. As an individual leader, it's really looking at your team and saying, are you letting them come to you and give you new ideas of ways to work? Are you shutting them down every way? Are you saying that, no, they'll never let us do that? Are you saying, no, We have to work within the system. Are you shutting people down? Are you really listening and you're saying, hey, how can we adjust this? Are you bringing that back to your superiors? Are you working within your team to say, are you asking them how we can improve this process? When's the last time you asked them that question? What else would you add to that?
I think the first thing to me would be, and the only thing I'll add now, I think this definitely needs to be expanded into a long conversation another time, would just simply be, this is a great opportunity to lead from the front. You will have an idea, you will have something, we all do, that we just haven't quite gathered the confidence to go and basically take it out there and give it a go. And I think, one of the great things about being a leader is that you can sort of say, this is on me. This is a captain's call. We're going to give this a go and we'll see what happens. Yeah. Tell your team, I want you to be more adaptive, or show them how to be more adaptive in the first instance.
And a good resource for that is, I'll just say this, is Mindset by Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K. It's on Amazon. You can order it. It's cheap. It's or inexpensive, and it's short, easy read, and it's great. And that's about the growth mindset. Great book and great way to get into that, your team into that growth mindset, improving the process. And the last thing we'll touch on, doesn't need a lot of discussion today, is be careful of experience. Experience can improve the system today, and you can improve a little bit at a time, but sometimes experience that's closed-minded will not be open to being adaptable to new systems, flexible to changing things, because they finally figured out a system that worked and they've had experience with it and they've tried new things, and there's no reason to change what's working now. That's another thing that is really going to stop your team or your division from being able to move forward. We'll have to have a longer discussion on what to do with that. What's your thoughts, real quick, Tim?
No, I think it's just a reinforcing a point that we've explored really as sufficiently as we can and we need to today. So I think I would be saying that's it for today, and that's a good place to rest. Be brave, lead from the front. Be cautious of experience when you're allocating some problem-orientated goals within your team. Be prepared to go and give somebody who doesn't necessarily have the deepest functional expertise a go. See what new options they come up with, and if you're hiring a new person to come in, again, maybe experiment with somebody who's going to look at things from a different perspective. But I'll say that's it from us, and that's farewell from me in Australia, and over to you, Tom. Take us out.
Yeah, and what's your tolerance for failure? And how are you developing a learning organization with a growth mindset so that you can be the change? Be the change. From Los Angeles, California, Dr. Tom, signing out.
See you next time.